Does carbohydrate consumption post-exercise matter? Well, yes, it does. But like most things, there's nuance. It depends. So if you're considering, when do I take my carbohydrates after exercising? How much do I take? Does it matter when? Should I wait a couple of hours? Should I have it as immediately as possible? We're going to dive into a little bit of the science of why it matters and who it matters for. So, shout out to Deakin University, Exercise Science, Nutrition Science, for illuminating some of this research and ideas. So, two interesting studies from the 90s, and one from the 90s, one from the 80s. And what we can see is that timing is important, but it seems to only really be important for replenishing glycogen stores if you are training again or having another bout of exercise later that day. Now, that's the practical implication I got from this to summarize, but here's the timing of it. So we see that there is a timing. What they did a study and they measured the glycogen resynthesis post-exercise. And what we saw was that within this 0 to 1 hour post-exercise, we see a uptake or an increased synthesis of an enzyme called glycogen synthase. Now, exercise actually provides a really strong stimulant for carbohydrate absorption predominantly because of this enzyme called glycogen synthase, which is increased post-exercise glycogen synthase activity, and that increases the permeability of the muscle cell membrane to glucose, facilitating a more efficient, faster absorption of glycogen within the first hour post-exercise. Now, interestingly, we know that insulin is a really important hormone for modulating our blood glucose, lowering our blood glucose post-meal. It is secreted, blood glucose spikes, insulin helps bring that back down, and it helps then shuttle the glucose you've consumed to be stored away, either put around in circulation or put away in the muscle and liver. However, strangely and interestingly enough, this post-timing of carbohydrates post-exercise seems to be insulin independent, meaning insulin is playing a no role or a very minimal role at all at shuttling that glucose into glycogen stores. Okay, that's odd. We've always been taught that insulin is really important to doing that purpose. Well, post-exercise, it appears glycogen synthase takes up a lot of that role predominantly. So, okay, seems like glycogen synthase does most of the work here in that short period post-exercise, but if we wait longer, particularly after an hour or more, slow phase 1 hour post-exercise is insulin dependent. What do we notice then? The maximum restoration of glycogen is 5 to 10 millimolars per kilogram of wet weight per hour. Whereas glycogen restoration, when you are consuming carbohydrates within that 1 hour window approximately, well, it's double, even triple the rate of glycogen restoration. Now, this is the implications, what I talked about earlier in this video. Implications to if you're training and exercising more in more than once in a day, then you want to be considerate and conscious of how quickly and rapidly you can store away glycogen, and then because you're going to reuse it again very soon in your forthcoming exercise bouts for that day. So you want to pick the most efficient path of glycogen restoration, which seems to be within an hour. So pretty much as quickly as possible, if you're training more than once in a day, you want to replenish your glycogen stores, get in adequate glucose amounts, and what's adequate for you is going to be dependent on a whole bunch of circumstances and nuances that we're not going to get into right now. But just know that that's an important time period for the people who are training more than once per day. For the people who are not training once per day, people are just training once a day, which is still great. It's more than 99% of the population. Well, we saw here in another study and I put it down here, muscle glycogen storage following prolonged exercise, effective timing of ingestion of high glycemic index foods. We see here from Parkin, 1997. So in one group, they gave them glucose immediately after they finished their exercise bout. And then another group, they delayed them by 2 hours. And then they observed the differences between, did this delay of replenishing glucose, thus glycogen, have an effect on the actual rate of glycogen restoration over an 8 and 24-hour period. Over that longer time point, it appears to have almost no differences, no significant differences, whether you consume your glucose immediately after or you wait 1 to 2 hours. Over the time point of 8 to 24 hours, it didn't make a difference. However, it seems to make a difference if you are training within 4 hours of getting that glucose replenishment post-exercise. So therefore, give some justification for importance of mealtime post-exercise. If you want to prioritize glycogen resynthesis as quickly as possible when you're training in the same day, then, yep, you want to ideally get that bolus of glucose in within the hour after training. If you're an individual who only trains once a day, the differences in carbohydrate timing post-exercise glycogen storage appears to make no difference over an 8 to 24-hour period, meaning carbohydrate timing post-exercise probably doesn't matter that much, according to these two studies. And so I hope that gives you some food for thought around your carbohydrate timing post-exercise and how to train and fuel yourself more efficiently and smarter. And just know that, hey, you can relax a little bit if you're only training once a day. You don't need to get in that food necessarily as quickly as possible from a carbohydrate glycogen resynthesis perspective. There are other perspectives to consider, but from this, it doesn't seem to matter if you're only training once a day in 8 to 24 hours. You'll be fine.